Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I am going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of October. October was a bit of a weird reading month for me, in terms of the fact that I was really busy, didn't have as much time to read as I had hoped or anticipated, and also because my list was very heavy in Victorian classics, that meant it took longer for me to get through books because Victorian classics just demand more of you than just, your average everyday book. And so that was great. I still loved reading Victorian classics this month. As always, I love Victorian classics in general. But yeah, so I ended up finishing the month with 10 things read, which sounds like a lot until you realize one of those things I read more than half of in September. Two of those things are short stories, and one is a manga. So, in all actuality, start to finish, I read 6 books, like actual books. So, it was definitely a slower reading month for me. Typically, I divide up my wrap ups by genre, so you can skip around if you want to, but I'm doing it slightly different this month in that I'm going to do a section for all the books I read for Victober, and then all the other books I read in October that were not Victorian classics. So yeah, so it's going to be a little bit different in that way. I'm going to start with the non-Victorian books because I just want to get them out of the way. They weren't quite as exciting, at least most of them weren't. So the book that I already alluded to that I read some of in September and some of in October is Anne of Ingleside. This is book 6 in the Anne series by L.M. Montgomery. And I listened to this on audio so far. I've listened to all of them on audio except Anne of Green Gables, which has just been a really lovely experience to listen to them. They're just soothing, they're comforting, and this book in particular is kind of divided between Anne and her children. At the beginning of this book, Anne is about to give birth to her 6th child, and so we follow them throughout the course of several years, her and her children, and I feel like the time is fairly divided up evenly between Anne and her children, which is transitioning us because I know the next book, Rainbow Valley, is more focused on Anne's children, and then the final book, Rilla of Ingleside, is about the 6th baby, who is, not a baby in that book. So it's kind of this transition in that way. And I really loved this book. It's actually been my favorite book so far after the first 3 books. So I felt like book 4 was fine and I enjoyed it. Book 5 was fine and I enjoyed it. And book 6, I really, really enjoyed. It had all that classic, beautiful nature writing that you've come to expect with Ella Montgomery. It had lots of funny anecdotes of childhood, which was something I was really missing, that we have a lot of in the first 2 books and haven't had a lot of since then. And so it was really precious to be able to see just the antics that Anne's children get up to, which one of them are, like Anne and are very imaginative, which ones are more practical like Gilbert, and which ones are kind of a mix. And so you're getting to know her children as well as kind of seeing the growing pains of motherhood and all of those kinds of things from Anne's perspective. And so it was just really, really wonderful. I really enjoyed it. I've been reading these with Stephanie, and it's really, really fun for both of us to chat about them together. I read Sourdough by Robin Sloan, which is a really weird little book, like really weird. So this is kind of set in a futuristic society in a way because it's very tech heavy. It's a very tech heavy society, and people mostly eat these like pre-made foods called like slurries that you just drink down, and they're called like nutritive gel. And so they're not eating real food most of the time at this tech company that our main character works for. And she ends up stumbling across this restaurant that has this spicy soup and this sourdough bread. And so she's obsessed and starts ordering this food all the time. She loves it. She starts feeling better as she's like eating real food. And then that restaurant has to close. And so the 2 brothers who run the restaurant give her their sourdough starter for her to start making her own sourdough. It's really interesting because there's definitely this whole like connecting back to roots in the story in terms of how you do certain things, and not just relying entirely upon technology, and kind of the relationship between technology and tradition and all of those kinds of things. So there's interesting commentary happening there. but it's really weird. It's really strange. There's weird things that start happening with the sourdough starter, and there's all these really quirky side characters. Our main character's name is Lois, and she ends up going to this like club called the Lois Club for people who have the name Lois, and that's really the only qualification for you to join this club. And there are different charter groups all over the country. And so like there's just some really funny, quirky things that happen in this book, and it was really strange. But also I kind of enjoyed it. You know, it was a little bit of everything. So I think I ended up giving it around 3 stars because I was like, wow, this was really weird, and I don't even know what I really think about it. But I did kind of enjoy it while I was reading it too. I also read volume 20 of Attack on Titan, which yeah, I'm reading through these with Christy. Christy lives from Dostoevsky in Space. And so it's been fun to read these with her. I don't know that I really have a whole lot to say about this particular volume, because what can you say when you get this far into a series? I think there's like 32 or 36 volumes in this series. And so we're well past the halfway point. And so there's a lot of things that I could say that would be really spoilery, but I really enjoyed this volume. I felt like it was really action heavy. And so it read really, really quickly because there was a lot of battle sequences and stuff like that. But at the same time, there were some very emotional things that happened in this volume. There were some moments that I was like, oh my gosh. And then there was just like some really emotional, like inspirational speeches by leaders to kind of help these soldiers when they're kind of cornered and they're not sure, like it's a life or death situation. It was a very heartfelt volume while also being very fast paced. And I'm still waiting for a reveal, but I think maybe I might get it in the next volume. There's a specific thing that I'm waiting for, and I really hope that it's coming really soon. The last thing that is not Victorian related is I reread some Washington Irving short stories / novellas that I'm going to be teaching to my American literature class at our homeschool group in the month of November. So I reread them in October, and the ones that I read were The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which I love. It is like one of my favorite Irving stories and one of my favorite stories in general. I just love Irving's writing. He's so descriptive, he's so witty, and it's really interesting to think about and talk about how Sleepy Hollow has been adapted in different ways. So you can think of like the classic Disney cartoon with Ichabod Crane being like really bumbling, and you know, it's much more humorous. And then you also have a lot of horror movies that have like the Headless Horseman in them and all of that kind of stuff. And it's interesting to see how different people have interpreted it, because I would say that the messaging and the writing in the actual story itself is quite humorous. I find it to be hilarious. I really, really enjoy it. And then I also reread Rip Van Winkle, which I didn't have as positive of feelings about the previous times that I've read it, but I really enjoyed it this time around, especially kind of digging deeper into some of the social commentary that Irving was addressing at the time period to kind of see where he was going with that. That was really, really fun. So I really enjoyed rereading these. They actually took me a lot longer to read than they normally would have because I did very close reading with lots of note taking to prepare for my class. So it took longer, but it was an even more enjoyable experience to read them so deeply. So the remaining 5 books that I have here are all from the Victorian time period. This first one that I'm going to talk about is the least like Victobery because it's actually a nonfiction. I hosted a read along of The Beatitudes by Charles Spurgeon with Dia from Novel Idea and Chrissy from Chrissy's Purple Library. This is our 3rd consecutive year hosting a Spurgeon read along in October. So it does suit Victober very well because Charles Spurgeon was a preacher in London during the Victorian time period. And it's wild to me to think about the fact that like he and Charles Dickens would have certainly known who each other was. I don't know if they influenced each other in any way, but it's just really interesting to think about that. Anyways, as you might imagine, this is a walkthrough of the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5. And so oh my goodness, this was just such a special read along. It always is when we read Spurgeon together, but this is like my second favorite Spurgeon. The first year we did Joy in Christ's Presence, and that is still my favorite. Honest Faith, I was slightly disappointed with, though I still enjoyed the read along aspect. It just was less cohesive than Joy in Christ's Presence. And then this one was just fantastic. So phenomenal. The way that Spurgeon frames the Beatitudes caused me to see them in an entirely different light. I don't know if I was ever actually specifically told this growing up in church or anything, but I just always saw the Beatitudes as different attributes that certain people have, and they are blessed because they have these attributes, whether it's being a peacemaker, whether it's someone who hungers or thirsts for righteousness, whether it's someone who mourns or is poor in spirit or whatever else. And I did realize that it's one of those things where it's like, okay, everyone should want to emulate these things, but some people, I just always assumed that some people have a special propensity or gifting towards some of these rather than others. Spurgeon actually refers to the Beatitudes as a ladder where each step builds upon each other. So the first one is being poor in spirit. You have to be poor in spirit before you can mourn, and you have to mourn before you can be meek. And it just like keeps going up the ladder. So he continues to build on like the previous parts of the Beatitudes while then talking about future parts of the Beatitudes. And it was just like a revolutionary way for me to think about the Beatitudes. And it was just, oh my gosh, it's just really wonderful. Highly encourage you to pick up this book if you are interested in Christian nonfiction at all. Don't be intimidated by the fact that this is written in the Victorian time period, because it still reads perfectly. Like, it is not difficult to read. It's still super accessible and super relevant. It doesn't feel like it was written in the 1800s. It feels like it was written, in this, like in the 2000s, it's amazing. And if you do end up picking this up, all of our live shows are still on my channel, so you can go back and watch them and hear our conversations and leave your thoughts in the comments. I know some of you have actually done that in the past with some of our Spurgeon read-alongs. So yeah, so all of those are still available to you, as well as we always end up thinking of different worship songs while we're reading. And every year we create a playlist of songs that it makes us think of. And so the playlist is linked in those live show descriptions as well. So if you want to check that out, you can do that too. The first book that I actually finished for Victober, that is a fictional Victorian book, is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This was technically a reread for me, but it has been like almost 2 decades since I read it, because I read it either like my senior year of high school or like the year after. I actually don't remember which one, but it was like right in that time period. And I didn't like it at all. I am shocked that I even finished the entirety of the book. I had some people tell me that it was like very romantic. And I remember having one friend in particular tell me that Heathcliff was like just such a dreamy bad boy. And I ended up reading it and being like, are you okay? Like, I didn't ask her that, but I was thinking that. I was like, are you fine? Because man, is this not a romance? And so I just had really poor feelings about this book. And then it ended up getting chosen for my in-person book club. And so I was like, okay, I've been wanting to give this another chance, so I'm going to pick it up again and see how it goes. I have still mixed feelings about this book. It does help going into it knowing that it's not a romance, but is instead kind of an examination of toxicity and generational trauma and all of those kinds of things, like all mixed together. And so it's a very interesting book in terms of how it examines people. It is a little bit more palatable in the fact that we have like a housekeeper that's narrating most of this book. And so it helps that it's not from Kathy or Heathcliff's perspective. And it's just really interesting because how it talks about love, I'm just like, this is not love. This is like toxic obsession with narcissism mixed in. Like, this is crazy. There's a quote, I don't know if it's on the back. No, it's not. There's a quote somewhere in here that gets quoted all the time at like weddings and stuff. And it's Kathy saying about Heathcliff something along the lines of, whatever his soul and mine are made of, it's made of the same thing, essentially. And I'm like, that is not a good thing in this book. So anyways, it was really interesting to reread this. I did enjoy it to an extent. I felt like it was very well written. I get why people love this, but I don't know if I have any desire to ever reread it because we just spent a lot of time. We spent a lot of time in some very dark situations and in some very dark minds. And there were things that happened in this book that surprised me given the time period where it was set. There was just some really like abusive things that happened that I was like, oh, we're staying here a little too long. And the end actually helped me. I don't want to be spoilery and give away the end, but the end of the book, I think, almost justified the means. I would have liked the middle to be a little shorter. And then I would have felt like it justified the means. But like I really struggled with it in some respects because it was just really hard. And I don't usually have a problem reading books that have unlikable characters doing terrible things. Like for lots of classic, I love Thomas Hardy, okay? Like a lot of those books have terrible people doing terrible things. But this, I don't know, it just hit different for whatever reason. And maybe because everything feels so isolated and feels so focused in because you have these two families in these two houses that really never leave. They just kind of stay in this little area and in their pockets of like absolute dysfunction. And so I think that contributed to it. But I get why people love it. I really do. But I don't think I'm interested in ever rereading this. I also read Vice Versa. Well, rather I listened to the audiobook by F. Ainsley. And this is essentially like Freaky Friday kind of story. I read this with Dia and Rainey. We have started a tradition where we read a funny book every Victober. So the first year it was Three Men in a Boat, then last year it was Three Men on the Bummel, and this year it was this one. And it's really interesting because I don't feel like this was a bad book, but I did feel like it was just fine. Like it was okay. I wasn't bored. I didn't dislike it. But it's interesting when you have a book like this that is kind of pretty much the source material for later things to come, but the later things to come have done it better because they've built on the original. Sometimes it's not the case. Sometimes the original is the best, but sometimes the story has just kind of changed and evolved enough to make it better. And that's what I think happened here. So we have this man and his son is about to go back to boarding school after his Christmas break or whatever. And they're not getting along because the son doesn't want to go back. It's not a great situation. And his father doesn't understand him. His father won't listen to him. And there's essentially this kind of like artifact type thing that he wants to bring back with him to show his friends. And his father accidentally wishes that, he could be a boy again. And so then the boy wishes he could be an adult. And so they just kind of swap places. So the little subtitle under the actual title is a lesson to fathers. And maybe that should have clued us in. But usually when you get a Freaky Friday kind of story, you have, the parent and the child switching places, and then they each learn about each other and they come to a greater and better understanding of what the other person goes through. And then they come out better in the end. Their relationship is stronger and they don't take the other person for granted anymore. That's not what happens here. So we only stay with the father who is in the son's place at this boarding school. We don't really hardly at all see what is happening with the son in his father's place. And so it felt like a really unbalanced story for that reason. We kept saying like, oh, I wonder what's happening at home and I wonder what's going on here. And we find out very little about what's going on there. And so as a result, it feels like the father learns much more of a lesson than the son. And again, that little subtitle, A Lesson to Fathers, should have clued us in. But I kept wondering, like, who wrote this book? Who is F. Ainsley? Like, did a child write this book? Like, I just was wondering because I was like, this is so much more focused on like children having it worse than adults. And like, maybe I've been an adult too long, but like, it's not easy being a kid or a teenager, but it's also not easy being an adult. And so it just felt a little unbalanced, but it was still like it was an okay book. It wasn't like there was anything like terribly wrong with it. For my Patreon group, we read Love and Life by Charlotte Mary Young, and this is my first adult Charlotte Mary Young. I have read one of her middle grade historical fiction, so it was interesting to read this one. It was not totally like what I was expecting. It definitely became more sensational as the book went on, which was really fun. So this is essentially a Cupid and Psyche retelling set in the early 18th century. So it was even historical in Charlotte Mary Young's time, as she was writing this in the 1800s. She set it like, 100+ years in the past. And so it was interesting that she chose that. It's really, I'm not going to say too much more about it other than that it's a Cupid and Psyche retelling, because I feel like I don't want to give too much away. But it was a fun story. It really was. I enjoyed it for the most part. I had heard, though, I went in with expectations I should not have had. I'll say that. I had heard that Charlotte Mary Young has incredible character development, and that she just goes really deep into that, and that a lot of her characters experience great suffering, and as a result have just exponential character growth that is really beautiful and moving to see. We don't really get that in this book. Not very much. I felt like the characters were really one note. It's like the evil character is evil and the good character is perfectly angelic. And the love story is very like Cinderella-esque in that like they haven't even like talked to each other and don't really know anything about each other. They saw each other one time kind of a thing. And so there's a lot of elements to it that are like that felt like shallow. It felt more like it was a fun story than a deep story. And maybe that was my bad going in expecting depth, because I just didn't get that. But it was fun. It was a fun story. About halfway through the book, things start really picking up. And there were points of this where I'm like, am I reading Charlotte Mary Young or am I reading Wilkie Collins? Like, what is happening right now? So it definitely was fun, definitely worth reading. But I think I am much more interested in the future in reading Charlotte Mary Young's domestic stories that are more based on family and have a lot more character growth, because I didn't find this book to be overly memorable. And the last book that I'm going to share, I actually finished on the last day of the month and was my favorite book of the month. And that's Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. You guys, this book, I loved it so much. I went into it with a little bit of apprehension. I actually vlogged this for my Patreon. I've had a lot of people recommend this book to me over the years, but I've had kind of a mixed experience with Gaskell. Well, not really mixed, because the other two books of hers, I had the same kind of feelings about, that I liked them, but I didn't love them. And I wanted so badly to love Elizabeth Gaskell, because I'm like, her writing's beautiful, but her stories just are not memorable for me. They just don't click for me the way that I want them to. They're just fine. Like they were like 3-star to 3.5-star books. But this one, this one was incredible the whole way through. Like, I loved it from start to finish. And I really struggled because I had other books that I needed to prioritize for book clubs or for other things or buddy reads or whatever. But all I wanted to be reading was this the whole month long. I just loved it. So if you've never heard of this story, this is the story of Molly Gibson, who is the daughter of a widowed doctor. And we start the book when she's very, very young. Like the first chapter, she's really young, and she ends up like going to this party at like this mansion essentially called the Towers, where, Lord and Lady live. And we see her experience with that, which kind of sets up the rest of the story. But she and her father are very, very close. He ends up having some apprentices coming in. That's pretty common for him as a doctor. But as Molly is growing up and getting older, he's realizing it's kind of inappropriate to have these young men in here being apprentices while she doesn't have a mother figure in the house. And so sure enough, one of these men falls in love with Molly, and he's like, I gotta do something. As a dad, I gotta do something. This is not good. So he ends up remarrying. And so then we kind of follow the rest of the story as Molly is adjusting to that. She has relationships with other people in the town, with other families in the town, and it's just wonderful. I love Molly as a character. I felt like she's really sweet and really wonderful, but she's not too sweet and too wonderful, if that makes sense. Like, she does still struggle, and she does still she has to like deny her selfishness and learn to like live with people who are not easy to live with, and learn to navigate social situations that she has no idea what to do with, and all of these things. And it is just, oh, I just loved it. I really, really enjoyed this. It's funny at times, it's heartfelt at times, it's tragic at times because Gaskell loves to just, I don't know, I feel like I've never read a Gaskell that people don't die in it somewhere. So it's just like, it's so good. It is so good. And the most unfortunate thing about this book is that it actually ends in such a way that like is unfinished because Gaskell died before she could write the final chapter of this book. It's obvious enough where the story is going to go, but the wonderful thing is that there's an editor's note at the end because this was published in a periodical, and so the editor of the periodical had some of Gaskell's notes of where she was taking the story and wrote a really beautiful tribute to her that's included in the end of this book about Gaskell as a writer and as a woman and her plans for the future story and how we can imagine how she would have wrote XYZ scene with this element in it and this thing in it. And it was just really touching, the tribute at the end, and wrapped everything up well enough that you don't feel like you just got robbed, where you're like, oh man, that was so good. And it just kind of went at the end. Like it was still really, really good. So I loved it. I don't have enough good things to say about it. I don't know what else to say about it. I have so many tabs. I loved it. And yeah, I maybe not. I don't know if I'm a Gaskell fangirly in general, just because I haven't loved the other two books of hers that I've read, but this one takes the cake, man. This is like just so amazing. You need to read it if you haven't. Well, those are the books that I read in the month of October. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. What have you been reading lately? What did you read in October? What's your favorite book that you read in October? And if you've read any of the books that I discussed here, I would also love to chat with you about those in the comments as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me. And I will see you again next time.